Hi and welcome. So let's talk about how we can create a virtual machine in Microsoft Azure and how we can connect it via RDP and how we can open that VM from the browser as well. So before we start with that, first let's talk about how we used to access a virtual machine that is present in the virtual private network and how we used to secure our applications, databases that are hosted in the virtual private network as well. So now let's take an example. If you have a virtual private network which is secured by using network security group and you have different kinds of applications, different kinds of machines which are hosted there. And for now, let's take an example that subnet A is hosting your web server and subnet B is hosting your database server. So now there is a need that you need to connect these machines from outside your virtual private network. So for that purpose, you need to create a public IP address so that you can connect it from the internet. And the second thing that you need is you need to open respective ports to access from the internet. So if you are using a Windows virtual machine, then you need to open 3389. And if you are using SSH protocol to connect to your Linux machine, then you need to open port 22. So if you notice here that the ports are actually exposed to the public, and if let's take an example that you have 20 such applications which are hosted in the virtual machine and are needed to be accessed from the internet. So now you need to open all the machines with the port 3389 or 22. So definitely if you have such a 20 applications, so it is not a good idea to just expose these ports from the virtual machine. So just we saw that opening of different kinds of ports to connect to your virtual machines from the virtual private network is not a good idea. Now let us consider similar scenario, but now we have a different solution to this problem. Let us consider the similar scenario wherein you have different kinds of applications that are present and which are hosted in different virtual machines. Now you need to connect to these database server or the web server from the internet. But one thing to be noticed here is that the machines are not exposing public IP address, but they are assigned a private IP address only. But now we will introduce a new concept which is called as a jump server. Now, the jump server is nothing but a virtual machine or any kind of machine that is present in your virtual private network, which can be assigned a public IP address and which can open port 3389 or 22 so that you can connect this machine from the internet. And now, instead, unlike the previous example, now in this case, the jump server is the only machine that exposes public IP address to the internet. So now, even if you have hundreds of such a web server or the DB server, you are no longer to be able to access to these machines because if you notice here, we have assigned a private IP address here. Now, as you are able to access to the jump server by using public IP address, so now once you have access to public IP address and the jump server, so now using this jump server, you can connect to subnet A machine and the machine present in the subnet B. So that is a difference. So you need not open different kinds of ports in different kinds of web servers and the data server. But one thing to be noticed here is that it is the thumb server will be exposed to the public because you need to open 3389 or 22. Now we just saw that how we can use jump server or jump box to connect to virtual machines present in the virtual private network. But to do that, we need to create a public IP address and also we need to open ports 3389 or 22. But now Microsoft Azure provides us a service which will let you access virtual machines by using a web browser itself. So now by using this service, you just need to log into your Azure portal and you will be able to access to these machines. So now we talked about the jump server scenario. So in this case, Microsoft Azure will create infrastructure that is needed for you to connect to your web server or the DB server in your virtual private network. So this is basically a managed service. So you don't have to worry about the infrastructure. So this service is basically known as Azure Bastion Service, and this is basically a SSL protocol that is getting used here. So you just need to log into your Azure portal, and you just need to access web server or the DB server by using this Azure Bastion service. So behind the scene, Microsoft will just create a virtual machine that will be able to access to web server and the DB server. And the advantage is that you can access to these machines from anywhere. You just need a secure access to a Azure portal. So if you log into your Azure portal, so you will be able to access to these machines on the browser itself. So this is a very much secure than creating a jump server. So now people are not creating a jump server or jump box, but they are using this managed service, which is more secure because if you notice here, so in this case, you don't have any public IP address. Even in case of jump server that Azure creates, you don't have any public IP address. So this is basically using SSL protocol to connect to your web server or DB server. So that is a main advantage. And also you don't have to worry about the infrastructure. So the jump server that is getting created is taken care by Microsoft Azure. So now, how we understand what is the Bastion in this case, because this particular Azure Bastion service will be able to just protect our resources, protect our virtual machines that host our web server, DB server, or different kinds of application.
So we saw a few concepts related to networking and how we can securely connect to virtual machines present in the virtual private network. So now let's create a virtual machine and let's try to connect it through RDP session.
So now I'm logged into my Azure portal, and now I'll try to create a virtual machine. I don't have any virtual machine, so I'll create one. I'm using a free trial subscription and I don't have any resource group, so I'll just try to create one. And you just need to give virtual machine name. So there are some naming rules that you have to follow. And the region is nothing but, as we discussed, is a geographical area where data centers are present. So based on your users, based on your need, you can choose one. And the availability options is nothing but in case if there is any disaster, any infrastructure failure, and you need your VM up and running and without any downtime, so you can choose availability zone so that Azure will basically just pull out the virtual machine or the data from the availability zone. So for that purpose, you can create availability zone. So you can mention how many availability zone that you need. So if you notice here, um, you can optionally specify an availability zone in which to deploy your VM. If you choose to do so, your managed disk and public IP will be created in the same zone as your virtual machine. So right now, I'll just select no infrastructure redundancy required. And the second thing is image. So I'll select the Windows 10 that I need. Azure Spot instance is an option basically for basically it is a, discounted price. You get a VM just because there is some unused capacity that is present in some region, and if you want to leverage that one, so you can choose one. So it you will get a discounted rate. But the problem with this is that um, the workload should be tolerant to infrastructure loss as Azure may recall capacity for pay-as-you-go workload. So if pay-as-you workload needs to be given that particular capacity, then that will get the priority and your VM may get deleted. So if you are sure that you are tolerant to that particular loss, then you can go ahead and get the spot instance at a discounted rate. But if you are not sure, then we will recommend that you should go with the no option. And the third thing is size. So basically, what configuration you need for your virtual machine so that you can specify. So by default, right now for this region, it is giving me default option of standard D2SV3, which has two CPUs and 8 gigabytes memory, which cost me 9,000 per month. So basically, this is a per month uh, approximately price that Azure gives us. So if you are not using the virtual machine for a complete month, and if you are just deleting this virtual machine in couple of days, so you are not going to be charged for whole month. So you are going to be charged for only 2 days. So keep that in mind. So I will keep the option which is default there. And this administrator account is basically you will be going to log into that virtual machine by using this uh, credential. So just keep in mind that you remember what password you give it. So it's trying to tell me that it needs basically a strong password. Now we have created a username password that we will be using to log into our VM. Now, here comes the option of inbound port rules. So, inbound port rules is nothing but the rules that you set uh, that defines whether the traffic is allowed from the outside world, from the internet, whether it is allowed or not. So now, by default, it is allowing selected port. So, selected port is nothing but right now it is RDP 3389. So that means the traffic from the internet is allowed on this virtual machine because we have open 3389 port. Here comes the disk option. So basically, this is basic OS disk type. So premium SSD, standard SSD, and standard HDD. So in most of the cases, you will be using premium SSD unless if there is a legacy application or there is some legacy requirement that you need to use standard HDD. But I'll recommend that you all should go with premium SSD and encryption type. So basically, the encryption at rest comes with a couple of options here. The default one is the platform managed key. So Azure will use their own encrypted key, and the second option is you can provide your custom key. But right now, I'll use managed key. And if you have any database that you can attach as well, but I will keep as is. In case of networking, so if you remember, we have allowed RDP and allowed 3389 port to be open. So if you want to change that, you can change here as well. And now, in case of management, I'll keep all the options as they are. But if you notice here, the diagnostic storage account is giving me an error that the value should be there. So the metrics are written to a storage account so you can analyze them with your own tools. So Azure storage account is nothing but a storage account where you can store non-structured data, Azure files, any kind of file you can store there. So internally, when you create a virtual machine, so the Azure will store some kind of a metadata about the and so that you can analyze the virtual machine or any kind of application. So for internal purpose, Microsoft just recommend you to create one storage account. So that is a mandatory one. So we will create that storage account here. Just remember that this is a unique name. Now it is available, so I'll just give that one. So just remember this storage account is going to be used by Azure for internal purposes. Now let's move ahead with the advanced option. So now we can keep this as is and the tags option. So basically tags is nothing but you will see tags in every services because this is basically a key value pair. If you want to save some metadata, so we can save that. So let's assign some key value pair here. So I think this virtual machine is going to be used by my team one. So I'll just create key as a key. and value as a T1, so that whenever anyone sees this VM, so it will be clear that this belongs to T1. Now the validation passed, and it is giving me a warning that you have set RDP ports to open to the internet. So this is only recommended for testing. If you want to change the setting, go back to basic tab. So it is telling me that you have 3389 ports open, and that is a threat. But right now, just for the testing purpose, I am just going ahead and creating virtual machine. So it took around 1 minute to create a virtual machine. So now it is ready, and you can see the details here. So whatever component, or we can call it a resource, so whatever resource that it needs to create a virtual machine, those are created. So if you see here, so it needs a network interfaces, virtual network, public IP address. So if you remember, we have 3389 port open. So that's why it has created a public IP address. If we don't have any port open, then there is no need to create a public IP address. So network security groups is nothing but security groups tells you to manage some rules where you can set the incoming traffic, outgoing traffic, and the storage account that we have created, and also the virtual machine itself. So now let's go to resource. So here is our virtual machine that we have created, and it is up and ready. So right now, if you see the tags that we have assigned, so from here itself you notice that this particular virtual machine is belonging to team 1. So that is the benefit of assigning the tags. So now, so you can just restart, stop virtual machine from here itself, and to connect to a virtual machine, you have multiple options here, and basically you can go ahead and delete the virtual machine. And this capture option is nothing but you can capture the basically the um, virtual machine. So whatever data, whatever applications, what is the whatever may be the situation of the virtual machine, if you capture it, so you are going to just have a snapshot present for that particular virtual machine, so that for future you can use it. So right now let's not go into much of the details. So we will just try to connect our virtual machine from the RDP session. So now, if you connect on RDP, so this is basically the public IP address that Azure has assigned. So we can use this IP address to connect to this virtual machine, because we have port 3389 open. So it gives you facility that you can download the RDP file, so so you don't have to manually enter IP address and all those things. So I have downloaded it. Now let's try to connect to virtual machine by using this downloaded RDP file, and it will ask you to connect and enter username and password. So I'll just enter one. So now let's say yes, and now we are successfully connected.
So we have seen how we can connect a virtual machine and use it through RDP session. But now in this section, we are going to see how we can create a virtual machine and use Azure Bastion Service so that we can securely connect our virtual machine in the browser itself. So in the last section, we have seen how we have created a virtual machine and how we have connected that virtual machine by using RDP. So now in this section we are going to see how we can connect virtual machine by using Azure Bastion Service. So now we are going to connect to a new virtual machine. So I have filled in few details to create a virtual machine, and the only difference in the first step is that in the last section we have seen how we have allowed RDP port, but now we are going to use Bastion service, so we don't need any RDP session. So I'll just click on none and I'll just proceed through. So now in networking tab, so if you see there are three options. So by default it will create a virtual network for you, and it will also create subnet and the public IP address. So first thing is that whenever you need to use virtual machine by using Azure Bastion service, so uh, for this purpose you will click on this create new. So and if you see here the address 256 addresses are assigned to a virtual network, and you the so by default option is that it will create a default subnet with the same addresses. So now in case of Bastion service, there is a mandatory requirement that whenever you need to create a subnet, so it should start with Azure Bastion subnet. So it will identify that this subnet is basically reserved for using this Azure Bastion subnet service. So that is a mandatory requirement. So now I'll just change these address ranges so that I will have more address space available for default subnet and the Azure Bastion subnet. So now if you notice we have more addresses, so I'll just create the default address, or you can rename it as VM subnet as well. So the address space range will be something 24. So now 256 addresses are assigned to this subnet, so it is not mandatory to name it as a default one, but you can change it. So similarly I'll create a second subnet. Now in this particular virtual network I have created subnets with name VM subnet and Azure Bastion subnet with 256 addresses to each. Now in case of creating a virtual machine we will use this subnet, but we are creating this subnet for Azure Bastion service. So right now we are just using VM subnet to create the virtual machine, but we will use it later. So now I'll click on OK. So if you notice here, while creating virtual machine, the subnet that is selected is VM subnet, and it is not even allow us to use this subnet because the name Azure Bastion subnet is specifically reserved for using a Bastion service. So let's move ahead, and if you notice a public IP address, it is going to create a public IP address, but now we are not using any RDP or SSH protocol. So what we will do is we will create none, and the next options are we are going to keep as is, and we are not going to change any of the options, and I'll just proceed through review and create. Now the virtual machine is validated and we can create it. So now the deployment is complete and your VM is ready. So we can just click and go to resource. So this is the VM that we have created, and if you see here you don't have any public IP address for this VM, unlike the last example, and also there is a private IP address as well, and the subnet that we have selected is VM subnet. Now uh, we have seen how we can connect RDP. Now we are going to see how we can connect it through Bastion. So if you click on the Bastion, so right now we don't have any Bastion service that we have set up. So if you click on use Bastion, so it will be creating a Bastion service for us. So let's click on that. So now if you see this window, so it has already populated few values here, such as the name and the subnet the public IP address and all those things. So we have given Azure Bastion subnet name while we have created a virtual machine. So if we had not created a subnet over there, so it would have asked us to create this subnet by using this link, manage subnet configuration. But right now, if you have followed all the steps that we did while creating a virtual machine, then you don't have to make any change in this window and just click on the create. It is that simple. Now it took around 5 to 6 minutes to create a Bastion service. So you will notice this window once that is done. So now it is asking me to enter the username password that we have given while creating a virtual machine. So now I can click on connect. So notice that it has created a new window, and it is trying to open virtual machine in the window itself. So see text and image copy to the clipboard allow, so you can allow it so that you can copy text from your VM to your local machine. Now we are actually connected to a virtual machine in the browser itself. So I'll just accept, and now your machine is ready, and you can use it for any purpose. And also you can notice the HTTPS over here. So it is the SSL protocol that is getting used to connect to your virtual machine. So it is very much secure as compared to using a jump server where you have to open port 3389 to connect to your virtual machine. So now it becomes very much easy when you have set up Azure Bastion service, and now it becomes easy to connect your virtual machine from the browser itself.